Hi, this is Terry Farrell, Dax from Deep Space Nine, and welcome to Random Trek.
Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to this timey-wimey episode of Random Trek. I am your fearful captain who has jumped through the giant portal, Christopher Ingle, joined as always by my trusty first officer, a man who is hyped up on Corzine. It's Commander Brennan, the mystical Mar. Brennan, how you doing?
You know, if I'm hyped up on it, I don't feel any different than I usually do.
That's possible.
Yeah.
But today we are taking a look at what is arguably, at least critically, the greatest episode of the original series. At least according to Rotten Tomatoes, surprisingly. City on the Edge of Forever, season 1, episode 29 or 28, the penultimate episode of that season. But we're not alone today. Today we are joined by, he wants to be a cadet, and I respect it. I respect this man, but we've had him on before. Friend of the show, you know him, you love him. Everybody welcome Steve Morris.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I've been demoted multiple times, sent back to the academy, and I feel like being a lifelong learner is an important thing. And so I think honestly, I would enjoy some time back in the classroom learning again, because that sounds like a lot of fun.
Back near the Golden Gate Bridge?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the Starfleet Academy is in my hometown in the San Francisco Bay Area, so I'm all for it.
Absolutely.
Yep. It's about an hour's drive for me, but I enjoy it.
Yeah. All right. Well, today, normally, I kind of lead the ship, but Brennan was really interested in running this one. And we have a movie night in next month that I really want to run, so we traded places today. So, Brennan, I turn the call on over to you.
Thank you, Captain, sir. We are so happy to be joined by Cadet Steve Morris.
I'm thrilled to be here.
Yeah, I mean, we were so excited when the randomizer gave us this episode, because this is probably peak Star Trek. And we know how much you love this episode. So immediately we're like, we got to get Steve Morris. So thank you for agreeing to join us.
Thank you so much for having me. I am, honestly, it's so funny. Like, City on the Edge of Forever, the way I think about it is like, if you ask people what is the greatest novel, you get some people saying Dickens and other people saying Victor Hugo and some people Hemingway and some Steinbeck. If you said, what is the greatest play? What is the greatest pop song? You get all sorts of arguments. But generally, in the world of Star Trek, this is put on top a lot, certainly of the original series. And there are many who say that this is the number one of all of Star Trek, which I think is a tough statement to make. But there's no question that this is a critical, seminal episode of science fiction and of television in general, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I could not agree more. You know, there's a difference between favorite and best.
Yes.
And for me, my favorite episode of the original series is Balance of Terror.
That's mine too.
This one, though, as far as like, it's the best episode, I think it's definitely up there. It's so hard to pick because Star Trek has given us some incredible moments of television. And even to this day, I mean, my goodness, Picard season 3.
So good.
Was amazing. And, well, but let's just say as a big fan of Next Gen, it got me teary-eyed a few times.
Same, multiple times.
And so we, even to this day, we're getting some incredible Star Trek. And this episode, I think, in many ways transcended being just a good Star Trek episode. This is a good episode of television, period. So let's sort of rehash the plot just really quickly. The Enterprise is orbiting a planet or it's dealing with some like weird time turbulence. One of the panels explodes, injuring Sulu. Dr. McCoy comes in. It's going to inject him with cortisone, and another turbulence happens, and McCoy accidentally puts it into himself. He goes completely raving mad, runs off the bridge, beams down to the planet after giving a good karate chop to Mr. Kyle. And we see on the planet the Guardian of Forever, a gateway to the past on Earth. As the landing party is trying to find McCoy, he jumps through the portal into Earth's past. Uhura attempts to contact the Enterprise. There's no Enterprise. It's gone. Spock surmises that McCoy must have changed something in the past. So they ask the Guardian to play the recording again. They go through around the same moment, with the desire to get there before McCoy shows up. Well, as they end up in 1930 New York City, and as they're sort of evading the police, they find themselves in the basement of the 21st Street Mission, a soup kitchen, because this is the Depression. And here they meet Edith Keeler, played by the great Joan Collins. Well, as things progress, Kirk begins to fall in love with her, while Spock discovers that she is the focal point of history. She was supposed to die in order to allow the United States to enter World War II. If she had lived, she would have created a pacifist movement that would have kept us out of the war, thus allowing the Nazis to get the atomic bomb and take over the world or destroy the world. And Kirk must make the heart-wrenching choice to let the woman he loves die in order to save humanity's future. And he allows it to happen, saving the future, but devastating Kirk. And that is The City on the Edge of Forever. Wow. That's heavy stuff. So I asked our guest, Steve Morris, this is a great episode, but boy, is this heavy.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
This is why this whole episode is an anomaly. It doesn't fit into. It is unlike anything in season 1 of the original series. It's really unlike the only one I think that's sort of kind of close in a weird way is like the Paradise Syndrome or something, because it's like what we're doing is we're leaving the world of the Enterprise and we're going, and essentially for acts 2, 3, and 4, we're just in a movie, in a period piece that is just dealing with these characters. And what it does is by, for me, stripping away all of the trappings of classic Star Trek and the Enterprise and science fiction and all this, we actually just get to explore the relationship of Kirk and Spock, the characters of Kirk and Spock, and then take Jim Kirk through this emotional experience that literally is unlike anything else. But again, the only exception is a little bit like the Paradise Syndrome, which is a lesser episode, but one I still like. I mean, this is, to me, it's the most cinematic, it's the most unique, and it is the most cohesively all of its own for me of any Star Trek episode. As you said, Brendan, I think you and I both have the same favorite, which is Balance of Terror, which is a fantastic episode of television, but that is quintessentially Star Trek. Whereas this exists literally in its own universe that only happens there. And the fact is it has more humor, more character in terms of the relationship with Kirk and Spock, and a harder, more painful, more difficult wallop of an ending of almost any Star Trek episode, period, for me.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, even the way the episode ends, you mentioned this on your episode of Enterprise Incidents. It does not end with a joke.
Nope.
It ends on a very downbeat note, which is unusual for Star Trek to end on kind of that sentiment.
Well, because even on some of the heavier episodes, they'll still end up with a joke in some ways. And when we did some of them on Enterprise Incidents, and none of them are jumping in my head at the moment, but there are some where it's like, oh, that joke really, like half a planet just got destroyed and you're just making a little quip. You know, like there's some really uncomfortable Gene Coonisms at the end of some of those episodes.
Yeah.
And I am so glad they exercised some restraint and just left this one with, let's get the hell out of here.
Yeah, because a joke at the end would have been very inappropriate.
Yeah.
Captain Ingle, your thoughts on just how downbeat this episode is?
What I really like about this, actually, you call this quintessential Trek, and I would argue that it's not. This feels so not like Star Trek to me.
True.
Because if you take out the Enterprise, take out that they're just a nondescript spacefaring crew, there is really no element that is absolutely unique to Star Trek, save for naming, the Guardian of Forever and how synonymous in Star Trek lore that becomes.
Yeah.
This is good science fiction writing at work. I could see this in a pulp science fiction magazine at any point in the 30s, 40s, 50s. No problem, no question. I could see this as a Twilight Zone episode. Like, this has that level of writing to it that this fits in science fiction canon and transcends that. And I think that's what I love about it. And you Steve, when you said this is so much not like other Star Trek that we see in the original series, it's not. It's very different. And I think that's why it plays so well, is that it resonates on a different level. It's not like watching Star Trek. You're watching a great story unfold in front of you. And I wish that was more magic that Star Trek could hit on a regular basis. Sometimes they do that. But, this is definitely the first one that I can think of that is just a powerful story that the science fiction takes over the fact that it's a Star Trek episode.
Yeah, it's well said. You mentioned the writing, so we have to talk about that. This episode was quote unquote written by Harlan Ellison, the great, if not somewhat a racist science fiction author. And incidentally, I believe Armin Shimerman modeled his performance in Far Beyond the Stars on DS9. As we know, Harlan is difficult, to say the least. And sometimes did some things that was not acceptable. So he writes this episode. That the original draft is ridiculous. And would have been impossible to make as this episode of 60s TV. So it was rewritten a few times by a few people. And sometimes rewrites can be a bad thing. Like if it keeps passing through many hands. Like too many hands, it could be a problem. This turned out just right. So Steve, you're a director and a writer. what are your thoughts on sort of the transformation of Harlan Ellison's script into the finished product?
It's crazy to me, frankly. Like I knew some stuff about the Harlan version, but I had always assumed that it was much closer to what we actually got than it actually was. And when we did this episode on Enterprise incidents, Scott Mance, my partner, who is great at research, told me what the actual Harlan Ellison story is. And it sounds there were pirates involved, or there were drug dealers involved, and there was a criminal case, and there were these other characters, and there was Yeoman Rand, and there was all of this stuff going on. And then in addition, the our two biggest changes that I remember from what Scott said is, number one, they knew ahead of time that Edith Keeler must die, or Kostler, whatever her name was, which ruins the whole thing as far as I'm concerned. It's the discovery. It's not knowing that and allowing Kirk to fall in love with her and then discovering it. That is critical to it. And then the second thing is, my understanding in the Harlan Ellison version is that Spock is the one who makes the decision, rather than it being Kirk finally who has to let the woman he loves die. The difference between those two things on two levels is huge. The first one is that you want to have the main character who's struggling with the difficult decision. They have to make the decision. If you take the decision out of their hands, then you kind of ruin the whole thing you're setting up. And the other thing is, it's totally destructive to the relationship of Kirk and Spock. So that episode, the pedestal that had Harlan Ellison on, drops way down considering how little of his actual writing is in this episode. And B, this is people talk about Gene Roddenberry, the great bird of the galaxy, as if Star Trek spawned fully formed out of his brain. And what this episode is the perfect example of is that making movies is a team effort. And this is Gene Kuhn and Dorothy Fontana and Gene Roddenberry and Harlan Ellison, and I think Joseph Pevney was the director, all of these people contributing little pieces to make something that is great. And actually, that is far more the story of Star Trek, the original series, and Star Trek in general, than the idea of the great genius who makes it all himself. That's not what Star Trek is.
Yeah, no, well said. I think that, the old saying, too many cooks in the kitchen, sometimes applies. This episode is an example of too many cooks was a good thing.
Well, it wasn't too many.
Yeah.
It was the correct number of cooks.
Yeah, it's amazing how many people were involved in making this episode what it is. And also, I think, casting Joan Collins was a brilliant decision, because she pulls off a role that maybe could have been mishandled easily. She pulls it off so well. Now, we, of course, have seen Kirk be a serious ladies' man many times. This one feels like he's kind of met his match in Edith Keeler. Captain Ingle, your thoughts on Joan Collins as Edith Keeler?
All right, this is my craziest hot take. I watched this a couple of times because when I first watched this, and I mean, for our rewatch, I sat there going, why do we think she's so great in this performance? I was like, I'm not buying any of this. I don't understand. And I thought something was wrong with me. So I watched it again. And then I watched it a second time or a third time, and I didn't feel any differently. I'm not feeling that performance from her that everyone sees it. And I kind of feel bad because I've read a lot of material on this, and universally people are like, oh, Joan Collins is fabulous. Joan Collins is great. I just don't see it. I don't buy the chemistry between her and Kirk. And I think she doesn't really do a lot different than a lot of other Star Trek girls do at the time. I feel they treat her in the same way that a lot of others do, that this is someone for Kirk to save, and in this case, he doesn't save her. But I feel she's treated that way, and I don't see that playing any differently other than she's got a more major role in this. She is the focal point, the center of this, which they would do more with some ideas down the line. But I don't know. I don't really gel with her performance, and I kind of feel, could this have been done with another actress? Could this have been done with any actress? So I don't know, but that's just my personal feelings as I was going through that with her, with Joan Collins. And Joan Collins is a fabulous actress who deserves all the accolades that she's had in her life. And I'm glad she's a part of this. But she's not the main focal point to me of what makes this episode great.
Okay, everyone, send all your complaints to Page Turn if they were not.
I'm crazy. I know.
I feel like a moderator at a political debate. So, Cadet Morris, your response.
So I will just say first, everyone is always entitled to their opinion, even when their opinion is wrong. That's absolutely okay. Look, there are perfectly fine, brilliant performances from brilliant people that have left me cold, and that actually always happens. So that's it is what it is. I don't feel that way. I feel like there's sort of a magic to her, and in particular, the way that her character is written and that she embodies it, which is that she has this. You know what I would say it is there's a conceit with her character. And the conceit with her character is that she is so perceptive that she sees through things with Kirk and Spock faster than anybody else. And that if you accept that and if you like it, then I think it works really, really well. But if that sort of doesn't sell you, then I would say it's probably very hard to get into what's going on, I actually want to push back a little bit, Brendan, on this idea that Kirk is the womanizer. Which is that and that is definitely something that's how people see Star Trek. And I know there's a real sense that when, William Riker was created in Next Generation, that there was this idea of we want to capture certain elements that people love about Kirk, the swashbucklingness, the good looking guy, and the womanizer. And so there's so many episodes of Next Gen, particularly looking at them today, where it's just really uncomfortable.
Young, fresh-faced William Riker
is just going after every pretty face he sees. And I was just looking again at my list of Star Trek episodes, and the fact is there are very few. Up to this point in season 1, there isn't really any serious, in my opinion. Is he attracted to a woman in Mud's Woman? Yeah, maybe. There's stuff with the conscience of the king, but he's also trying to trap a murderer in that one. Miri's not. Dagger the Mind, his brain is controlled. Court Martial, he has an old flame. That's something you see a lot. But actually, there aren't a lot. And even in season 2, there aren't a lot. It's when you get into season 3 and some of those lesser episodes where that aspects of it. It's more Kirk is married to a ship. And of course, there's Yeoman Rand. But that's a relationship that he's always resisting. I actually think where the idea of Kirk as a womanizer makes City on the Edge, if that's your impression of him, which you certainly could get from later on interpretations, if that's your impression, it makes City on the Edge Forever a less good show. But if the only female relationship that's really strong is the one in Yeoman Rand, and that is where Kirk is rejecting love. So you have a character who is continually choosing not to be in a relationship, not to be in love, and then he gets brought to this other world essentially and falls in love in this unique bubble of a space. That's why that works so well. But if it's Kirk the womanizer, it works less well, in my opinion.
It's true. I do think that season 3 does sort of
go off
the rails with that. And sort of creates our cultural perception of Kirk. When you actually go back, season 1, it's he's not like that at all.
No.
He's a nerd, as we've discussed. He is a nerd. He is an encyclopedia. So Star Trek, two of the big things that Star Trek has always dealt with are in this episode. Number 1, time travel. Number 2, hard ethical decisions. This might be the hardest ethical decision in the original series. In fact, arguably, maybe in all of Star Trek. the idea of you got this one person, if she lives, the fascists win in World War II. If she dies, they lose, and eventually the Federation is created. The old Star Trek mantra that we hear in Star Trek II, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one. This illustrates that concept probably more powerfully than anything. Now, the element of peace, Edith Keeler was all about peace. And if she had lived, she would have convinced President Roosevelt to stay out of World War II. There's a great line in this episode where Kirk says she was right, but at the wrong time. I think, to get a little deep here, I do not think that pacifism or diplomacy would have worked with people like Hitler. As much as I admire the idea of peace, there was a conflict that could not be settled with peace. So, Steve, what are your thoughts on the idea of she advocates peace, but it's not really going to work in that situation?
I think I'm trying to figure out how to put this into words. It's something that we talked about quite a bit on Enterprise Incidents, and I always struggled with this idea. Mm-hmm. But I think one of the best things about the original series, when you really look at it, even though we have Kirk, who's our hero, who saves the day over and over again and makes great decisions, it's rarely actually that it is a clear choice between right and wrong. It is frequently a value judgment that is going to have costs in multiple directions. And that what really good, there's times where people think, oh, good episodes of Star Trek are where they have a moral and they tell us how to live good lives. And I'm like, no, that's not what good episodes of Star Trek are for me. Good episodes of Star Trek are ones where people wrestle with impossible decisions and they struggle and they make one, but those decisions don't come without costs. My feeling at the end of This Side of Paradise, where Spock is happy for the first time in his life, and that is taken away from him, is basically mostly Kirk made the right decision, but it sucked. There's so many, and that's where I think, and again, just is not to get political at all, but we live in a world where everybody tries to cast everybody else as the bad guy. I'm the hero, you're the bad guy. We have black and white, good and evil. And that is not reality. Reality is those other people, they actually have things that they care about and values that are important to them. And those values might come into conflict, but that doesn't mean their values are not true. That doesn't mean their values are not important. And that we actually need to be doing is wrestling intelligently with these things. And so I actually think what I will say is that this is the most clear and emotionally resonant version of what you described of the needs of the many and the needs of the few. And in this case, did Kirk make the right decision? Absolutely. Is it a decision without consequences? Absolutely not. There are other episodes where Kirk is threatening to destroy a planet, which is way bigger than just one person. But it doesn't have the same emotional resonance, so we don't think about it. I also think, just to your point about World War II and pacifism, of course, I agree with you that particular case is one in which we had to fight that war to win that war. There are also cases where the same argument is made where maybe there was another path. And the beginning of the maybe there was another path is seeing that other side, that other group as human. And right now, a normal thing when things get violent is one of the first things we do is start characterizing the other side as less than human, that they are evil, they are terrorists, they are communists, they are fascists, they are whatever group you hate. We say these are monsters, and therefore the only way to deal with monsters is to destroy them. And that frequently is not true. I think if we were to add up most of the wars in human history, most of them were avoidable. And most of them were greedy people trying to attack other people or trying to destroy other people. And the world would be, I'm sure Edith Keeler would agree, happier, healthier, more prosperous, less dangerous if we actually did do it at this time. And there will always be people who say, yeah, you're right, but this is not the right time for that. We hear that today all the time.
Yeah. It's the slippery slope of justification.
Yeah.
In the case of World War II, I think it's pretty clear that the fascists were dead.
Yeah. As a Jewish person, I could not agree more.
Yeah, it's good. I think that there's no question.
And Japan was trying to take over the world, or half the world.
Yeah.
That's absolutely true.
Yeah, and so Edith Keeler's values, as noble as they might be, were not going to work in that particular moment. Captain Ingle, your thoughts on Edith Keeler's morals and the situation of the world at that time?
I find myself probably falling into the line of thought that Edith Keeler has, in that, peace is the answer. I'm not saying I would be right, but I am saying that I probably would do exactly what she's doing. And seeing, though, that sometimes this kind of puts that point that we have to fight. We have to protect those. We can't just stand by, and that talking alone isn't going to work for the human race. That's so anti everything we've learned from Star Trek, especially growing up with TNG, where diplomacy was Picard's bread and butter. Talking things out all the time was Picard's ideal answer. He could fight, but he was more likely to talk things out and to negotiate and to work it out. He was a diplomat. That was something that I was used to, and I tend to fall on that line. But I do find it interesting for me that, we talk about how with Kirk, how difficult this decision was. I don't think it was as difficult as we think it is. Fast forward again to TNG when Deanna Troi is taking the commander's test. And what is the one lesson that she learns about command that Riker's trying to teach her? That sometimes the hard choice is the right choice. It's not easy, but the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. Something we learned all the way back in Spock. And so Kirk is just being a Starfleet officer. Granted, it's still a hard decision. That doesn't make it any easier. And I think Riker in the episode with Deanna mentions that too. It isn't easy, but it's what needs to be done.
Can I make a more personal example?
Certainly.
Like, I'm sure both of you have been in situations where you had some friend or someone was close to you and they were in a conflict with someone else and they were saying, this person did this to me on purpose. They're trying to hurt me. And most of the time when you're in that situation, you're looking at it, you're going, you know what? They probably weren't thinking about you. They probably were just doing that thing. The number of times that people are actively trying to hurt each other in our lives, we don't take up that much space in each other's lives. And I think that's true. And so I think most of the time, letting go of your anger and letting go of the conflict and saying, hey, I'm going to put out the olive branch. I'm going to open myself up and try to resolve this, despite the fact that I'm angry at this person or I feel hurt by them. And I think 85% of the time, that is the right call. And as mature humans who want to live in a better world, that's how we should be thinking. The problem is, every once in a while, they are trying to hurt you. And I had one very, very close relationship that ended very, very badly with a very good friend. And I spent a good year going, he's not trying to hurt me. We can resolve this. And I kept putting out the olive branch. I kept opening myself up. I kept saying, let's work this out. And I kept getting hurt over and over and over again until I finally had to acknowledge the fact. And other people then told me, no, that person wants to hurt you and is trying to end the friendship. And that's what it is. And I went, oh. There's a line from a book called It's a Lot Like Dancing, which is about martial arts and Aikido. But one of the lines that I love is, in order to have war, we must keep our enemies alive. And there are people out there who are trying to keep their enemies alive. They need enemies in their life. They need people that they want to destroy. And this is the thing. This is what World War II is. World War II, no, there was no resolving that. They were trying to kill all the Jews, kill the gypsies, kill homosexuals, and take over the Western world. And Japan is trying to take over Asia and the Pacific. And that's what they're trying to do. And that's their goal. And there's no negotiating with that. There are other cases where they just want a place to live, you know, like that's a different thing. And so but the problem is when we're in the midst of these things in our personal lives and in the world, it's real hard to tell which one you're in.
That's well said. I think this episode, I think as you said earlier, and I agree, there is an answer, but at the same time, it's not an easy answer, and it doesn't come without some degree of pain. Or a lot of pain in this case.
Yeah.
That letting Edith Keeler die is a very tragic, sad thing. But it was one of those things that needed to happen in order for the future to be secured. And the great moral dilemmas are, it's not a clear moral. It's not the moral of the story.
Right.
It's was that the right answer? I mean, for history's sake, yes. Was it the right answer in terms of personal life? Don't know. And that's the great thing about Star Trek.
I have a question for both of you.
Certainly.
So, you know, in the original series, we don't go back in later episodes and discuss things that happened in earlier episodes. And I actually think, particularly in the first season, but really in the whole original series, Kirk has a lot of tragedies. There is a lot. His family gets killed. People he loves get killed. Edith Keeler. And I go, okay, when Jim Kirk in his private heart goes back and thinks about Edith Keeler, does he think, A, I cannot believe I had to let her die. That was the hardest thing I ever did. Or does he think, B, I can't believe I had to kill the woman I love? How does he perceive that moment? Does he think that he murdered her? Or does he think he let her die?
Ooh. Captain Ingle, I'll let you go with it.
Yeah. Look, Kirk is human. We have to accept that. And his humanisms are what makes him get into the situations that we love to watch. It's Kirk's human nature. But I really want to think of him as this almost superhero, and he's a Starfleet officer. I think at the end of the day, he feels that and understands the emotions that come with it, and it hurts. But we've seen time and time again that the one thing Jim Kirk does well is to be a Starfleet captain. And a Starfleet captain has to make the decisions that help the greatest good. He knows that. He does that. And he does it time and time and time and time again. And I refer to a Star Trek 2, My God Bones. What have I done? The same thing you always have, Jim. Give us a fighting chance. That's what he's doing. It hurts. It's hard. He probably does think about those things, but he is first and foremost a Starfleet captain, and he lives up to that continuously. And I've never seen anything else that would challenge me otherwise, that he is not a Starfleet captain at heart and runs his life as such.
I think for me, I would be inclined to agree that duty really is what comes first for Jim Kirk. He's married to the Enterprise. He's married to his Starfleet career, and I think that he realized that, yeah, I love this woman, but I have a duty to the future, to the Federation, to to the uniform. And so I think that for me, I would agree that for him, it's about duty.
And it's not the only time we're going to see this with Jim Kirk. We see it in the movies, countless episodes. I can think of alternate Jim Kirks. The Jim Kirk in Strange New Worlds when La'an accidentally went through time, and we had the alternate Jim Kirk who went through time with her, again, willing to sacrifice himself to do what needed to be done, even though he didn't really, this is a different reality. It's not his time, but he does it anyway. And of course, the Calvinverse Kirk willing to sacrifice his life to save everyone else, pulling, the Spock from Wrath of Khan. But this is a guy who will always do what's right, no matter what timeline we've seen. And I love that consistency with his character of always doing the right thing. And I would suspect that he's probably got a lot of turmoil in him at some point as a human. But at the end of the day, that idea that I'm a captain, I'm still doing what's right. He's trained. He knows. He's past the Kobayashi Maru. He cheated.
Well,
but he understands.
creatively, shall we say.
But he gets it. And I think that's one of the great things about Jim Kirk is that he is the consummate Starfleet officer. Even when he's not doing right, he's being a Starfleet officer.
So I agree with everything both of you said, but I also want to point out that neither of you actually answered my question, which is the question was, when he thinks of this moment in his heart of hearts, does he believe that he let Edith Keeler die or that he killed her? And I agree with everything you said about duty and about being a Starfleet officer and being the captain of the Enterprise and understanding the sacrifices necessary to do the right thing. And I think that Jim Kirk must be, as any great leader is, they must have an incredible ability to compartmentalize their emotions and follow what needs to be done. And that is what he has done. And I think that he is content, might not be the right word, but knows in his heart that this was the decision that had to be made, and that he saved his galaxy and he saved his crew and he saved his life and he saved everybody that he cares about and the Enterprise. And that was the right decision. And when he's done other things where people had to die, he do those because that's what a military commander has to do. But I also think that there is a realistic, hard, cold center that doesn't shy away from the truth. And in particular, a character that there are people who don't want to accept responsibility for things or don't want to see their own sins or don't want to see their own failings or don't want to face certain things about who they are. And I don't think that's James T. Kirk. I think James T. Kirk faces in his heart of heart in the most stark and dark and honest way. And I think he goes, I did murder her because that's what had to be done. And he will carry that with him for the rest of his life. That's what I think.
Wow. Man. I'll say that Captain Ingle and I answered the questions like politicians at it today.
Yeah.
I don't know. And for me, I still don't know if he murdered her or any of that, because my thought goes into timey-wimey stuff. Like, well, she was supposed to die anyway. Are you really killing her? Or are you just going through with what history is supposed to do? That doesn't probably make it feel any better for Kirk. But for me watching, I'm like, you did what needed to be done to correct the course of history. You had to. You didn't murder her. She was already going to die in the first place. And your being there interfered with that process in the first place. I don't know. Maybe it's a more logical avenue to it, but then you could also look at, well, predestination paradox. Maybe they were supposed to be there to kill her to create the history, but then you go into time travel things that the Temple Authority does not like us to get into.
No, the time travel rules in Star Trek don't make a lot of sense, really.
I mean, time travel never makes sense, but Star Trek is particularly bad.
Yeah, and though, I mean, we enjoy it because, hey, a good time travel story is a lot of fun. Just don't think about it too hard.
Yeah.
You guys know, I assume you know the trolley problem?
Yes.
Yes. Oh, yes.
This is a good example. So the trolley problem is there's a bunch of people on a trolley track and a train running towards them, and you can hit a switch and move the train off of the trolley off of that track, and it'll kill one person. Do you do it? Most people say yes. And then there's another version, which is you're standing above the tracks, and there's a person, and the trolley's heading towards 5 people, and you can push an innocent bystander in front of the train, and that will stop the trolley. And most people will say no to that. In both cases, one person will die to save many. But in the case where you're just flipping a switch, you don't feel quite as involved as you are in the case where you actually lay your hands on someone and push them. Kirk could have, had he pushed Edith Keeler in front of the car, that really feels like murder. But because he restrains someone from saving her, maybe that feels less like murder. And yet they're both the same thing. You are creating an action which causes a death to save other lives. You know, this is the City on the Edge of Forever is a perfect trolley problem.
Yes, indeed it is. And it's really one of those great moral conundrums that Star Trek gives us. And this might be... No, I don't want... It's not the first time that they've done this and presented a moral question. But this is definitely the biggest. So, as we sort of come toward the end, I mean, this is a great episode. The question, the slightly rhetorical, but not rhetorical question I'd like to pose, starting with our guest, could this be the greatest episode of Star Trek ever? What are your thoughts?
So, as you know, I do the podcast The Cinephiles, and my partner John Roca did a show called The Top 10 where they ranked things over and over again. And I whenever I talked about it, I'm like, I don't know how you do this. Like the idea of ranking things and was this the best or is that the best? I don't know that I can say. You know what I mean? Like in the end, like we always say that Citizen Kane, or most people say Citizen Kane is the greatest film ever made. And I think there's a very strong argument for that. Do I think that this is the greatest Star Trek episode ever made? It is the one we always call the greatest. You know what I mean? Like, I actually think in terms of a tight adventure story, you can't beat Mirror Mirror. You know, in terms of a tight action building to a climax, you can't beat Doomsday Machine. In terms of, and I'm just talking about the original series, in terms of the combination of all the characters and political ideas and deep emotion, you can't beat Balance of Terror. You know, like each of those episodes, which are, you know, in my top 5 of Star Trek period, have things that City on the Edge of Forever does not have. But in terms of just Kirk and Spock, you know, and in terms of it just going to this totally other place, that's why I think that's the biggest difference is it's not competing with those other episodes. You know, Mirror Mirror and Doomsday Machine are competing with each other. Nothing is competing with City on the Edge of Forever. As far as the greatest Star Trek episode of all time, you get into a weird thing of like, well, if you grew up with Next Gen, by the time you get to Inner Light or Best of Both Worlds Part 1 or some of those other ones, that's it for you. That's why you love Star Trek. And so you can't, and then if you finish Next Gen, you go, oh, I think I'm going to check out this original series thing, and you get to City on the Edge of Forever. I'm confident you'll like it because it's a fantastic hour of television. But am I confident that you're going to go, oh, this is better than any of that Next Gen stuff I watched? No, that's probably not going to happen. So, like, I do think, but I also think, you know, it is important that that people who love film continue to go back and watch Citizen Kane. And I think it's important that people who love science fiction have to go back and watch City on the Edge of Forever, because this is one of the most important episodes of television, important science fiction stories, and important episodes of Star Trek ever made. And it still is fantastic.
Yes, very much so. Chris, same question.
Real quick, remind me of the question one more time.
Is this the greatest Star Trek episode of all time?
Okay. For me, looking at it from an educator's standpoint, you know, and how well we tell the story, what's being presented, what are the thoughts that come from the questions. It's not just spoon feeding. Oh, this is definitely not spoon feeding. To me, it is the greatest. This is something that I would show my debate kids when I teach debate. I would show this and ask the very questions that Steve gave us today. Those kinds of questions are up for debate, and there's no right or wrong answer. And I love that. And giving us those opportunities, that's what's valuable to me. But I like also what you said, Steve, that, you know what, there are different episodes that kind of serve different purposes, do different things. And for me, I guess you're right. This is the one that I think of all the time when that question is asked. This is up there. And it never grows bad. It never grows old. It never grows stale, because the themes that are mentioned are still deep within us. Whether you're in the 1960s or, 40 years from now in the 2060s, these issues with human nature and what the choices are that we make and why we make them and how we live with them, how we live with ourselves, that is timeless. That will never change. That will be with us for eternity until this planet is annihilated. Those are going to be with us. So in that regard, it does its job well to make us question ourselves. And so, yeah, it is the greatest episode of Star Trek because it shows us the greatest avenues of our mind and our existence.
Well, very well said. I think for me, it's a hard choice because I grew up on Next Gen, so there's a few episodes there, particularly Best of Both Worlds, the Inner Light. You go to DS9, you got Way of the Warrior, and Thor Beyond the Stars, an incredible episode of television. So for me, it's really hard to say that I would say it's definitely in the top conversation. And I think when we talk about the original series, it has a lot of great episodes. This one and I think Balance of Terror for me are like the top. So it's really hard to pick because there's so many great episodes. But it is definitely up there.
You know what I would add, and this is just maybe this is just because I've been thinking we've just been through a lot of political stuff that's been pretty brutal, and there's been this is going to sound like a weird analogy. There's been all this polling, and people always talk about polling, and then they argue about polling, and they make suggestions about how to change polling, and then they, so for instance, there'll be some policy on immigration, and then they'll look at the polls and they'll go, how did their policy on immigration affect the polls? And then they'll change the policy, and then we'll have new polls, and that goes over and over and repeat and repeat and repeat. And more, I think this is an extremely destructive thing to do. I think and mostly I think every minute you spend talking about the polls about immigration is a minute you didn't spend talking about immigration, which we actually need to talk about a lot more. And so this is why I only came on John's top 10 show once, and it wasn't a thing I'm good at because it doesn't, in the end, it doesn't matter which is actually the best episode of Star Trek, because we're never going to answer the question. And if we argue between Inner Light and Beyond the Farthest Star and City on the Edge of Forever and Balance of Terror, we're not actually spending time admiring those shows and discussing the themes of those shows and enjoying those shows. And I actually think there's more to get out of that conversation than, because you're going to have your favorite. That's fantastic. But but this is a thing. Geeks love this. We have all sorts of top 10 lists all the time of which is the best MCU character and which is the best Star Wars movie and what, and it's like, and bickering about that stuff rather than just celebrating why this episode is so darn good,
Well, that's very well said. I think that is the perfect way to bring us to the conclusion of this great examination of the City on the Edge of Forever. Steve, we cannot thank you enough for joining us today. We know just how much you absolutely love the original series and just how much this episode really means, to you and to many other fans, including us. So thank you very much for joining us. Where can we find you?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. Any opportunity to come talk about something I love, that's a joy and a privilege. So I really appreciate the invitation, and particularly for City on the Edge of Forever. You can't do better, although I'm still saying maybe we shouldn't argue so much about whether or not it's the best. right now doing the Cinephiles, which is my deep dive podcast, ridiculously deep dive podcast on great films, which Brennan, you have been a tremendous supporter on for a very, very long time, and I very much appreciate that. We just finished a run on Paul Newman and Robert Redford, and that led us into our Halloween episodes on the fly. And I cannot begin to tell you how happy I am to be doing this film, which is we're right now in the middle of Guardians of the Galaxy, which is an absolute joy for me.
Yes,
I love every minute of it. I'm having a ball discussing it. So the Cinephiles, CINE-FILES, Guardians of the Galaxy right now, and you can find me on Twitter or X at SR Morris.
Awesome. Yes, and I've been listening to the Guardians of the Galaxy breakdown, and you guys are really having a blast.
We really are. We're having too much
It's
fun.
such a great film. It really is.
It is.
All right. So I turn the con back over to you, Captain Ingle.
Thank you very much. Well, we definitely this is going to be interesting because we're going to be going next week. We got to hit the randomizer.
Oh boy.
And next week we go to Next Generation.
Oh boy.
So let us see what they give us for Next Generation.
Let's see if the quality stays the same or goes down.
I don't know.
Let's see.
Oh, it's down.
Uh-oh.
It's down almost as low as you can go.
Uh-oh.
But hey, when you go down, you've eventually got to go up, and we've got to go up the long ladder.
Wait, which one's that? Which one's that?
That's the one with the
Irish
egregiously
people.
bad Irish stereotypes.
Oh no. Oh, well, talk about Riker, his womanizing that episode.
Yeah.
That's definitely in there.
Oh, it's so bad. But you know what, guys? I'm going to admit it. I watch it and I still enjoy it. I see every problem, but I sit and enjoy it. But I'm also going to admit I have a bias. So for my birthday this year, I asked for a 2-part review, and we went to Fairhaven and Voyager. I did the Fairhaven Voyagers. Why? Because I love Ireland. I just do. And
even if it's Irish stereotypes.
They were Irish stereotypes, but we agreed that Fairhaven did a lot better than Up the Long Ladder. But now we finally get to look deeply at Up the Long Ladder, which just feels like 2 stories mashed into one. But we'll get into that next week.
You know what I'm curious about, and I know you guys had to go, but just because of the way you're doing the show, I am always curious about the batting average. And the batting average, I think, of original series, particularly the first 2 seasons, is ridiculously high. And while they're great shows in Next Gen, the batting average isn't always so good. You know, and since you're going through randomly, there's a lot of episodes like this one for me.
We have a long stretch where it's like really, really good. And then inevitably we'll hit animated series, which we're not as kind to.
It's not that good.
Yeah, or first and second seasons of Next Gen, DS9 of Voyager. Consistently, they tend to have more bad than good.
Yeah.
But you know
rocky
what?
start.
Yeah, Discovery, same way. Although I love Discovery, I have a heart for it. The first couple of seasons, it takes a little bit to get going, and I get it. But next week, we're going to take a look at the atrociously panned Up the Long Ladder, season 2, episode 18. Cannot wait. Oh, Brennan, where can the people find you?
You can find me at the moment. You can find me on X at Brennan Mystical. But I'll be doing a lot more stuff on Blue Sky. You can find me on Threads and Instagram, Brennan Blue, and you can find me on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify at Page Turners. They were not.
Yes. You can find me on Twitch and Twitter at CIngle1984. And just a reminder, end of this month, our movie of this month is Blade Runner. We're going to be taking a look at Blade Runner, a classic sci-fi film that very depthly combines noir and science fiction. We love it. And then next month, a movie that Brennan has never seen that I'm really excited I chose for him to watch. It's one of my favorite feel-good movies, and it's got Spielberg's fingerprints all over it. Batteries not included. So I'm really excited to take a look at that with you, Brennan. But as always, we end every episode. Kapla! And live long and prosper.
Peace and long life.